All right, back to the history of sailing at sea. In the early days, life was very hard for sailors. Sailors were considered a lower class. They often got put to work by a press gang. They would basically be kidnapped and put on board the ships, or shanghaied, as the term was out in California. But the living conditions were poor, the wages were poor. It was not a glamorous life. The food consisted of hardtack and salt beef, salt pork, or salt fish, and then they'd boil it, and basically you had a slop that was very bland, very non-nutrition, so scurvy became a problem. Having fresh fruits and vegetables, that didn't happen. Only one ship that I didn't have fresh fruits and vegetables all the time. I was on an ocean surveillance ship back in the 80s, and we left the dock, and it was 90 days before we returned. We saw nothing but blue water for 90 days. A couple times we did see Russian bears fly over the top of us and spot us. The Tupelo 95, the long-range bomber, because we were tracking subs. So that was my experience of having no fresh food after the first month. The second month it got a little boring. You had canned stuff, and then by the last month you were down to crackers, and hopefully there was some crackers and peanut butter or something that you could eat. It was a very small ship. It was only 250 feet long. It was the middle of the winter. I was lucky. I was off Bermuda for the whole 3 months. Sister ship was up off Iceland. We both came back to Norfolk at the same time, and they were all just about as green could be. They had been seasick for the last 20 days. They had, and we were like, oh, it was nice off Bermuda. So lucky us. But the conditions on the ships, they would, if you didn't have clothing, they had what they called the slop chest, where you could buy dungarees and a shirt, but they would charge an exorbitant amount and withhold it from your wages. The sailors didn't get paid until the end of the voyage. There was no sending monthly checks home. There was no advance. You might put in 2 years before you saw a paycheck. Or if you were lucky on a coastwise schooner, it might be a month. But some of these long-haul ships, the clipper ships that went to the West Coast, the ships that sailed to Africa and the Mediterranean, they would have long voyages. For me, a long voyage was 125 days, 140 days. For them, it was 4 times that. So those old ships, it was, as you know, was a dangerous life. They had no NOAA weather forecast for them. They ran into all kinds of hurricanes, like the Angel Gabriel. They got here, and a day later they had a hurricane come through and destroyed the ship. Some of the passengers hadn't disembarked, and some of the crew were still on board, and they all perished. The other thing about the old sailing days was that discipline. There was, if you failed to follow an order, you might receive some lashing. If you were mutinous, you might get keel hauled, which it's not side to side, it's front to back. And the ships would often be covered with barnacles, and it was rare that somebody would survive a keel hauling. That was pretty much a death sentence. And if you did survive the trip down, they may just cut you loose and sail away and leave you there. So it wasn't very, very promising. Emmett, you bored? We'll talk about pirates in a little bit. And that's another thing sailors have had to deal with for years, is pirates, the Caribbean pirates, which everybody's fairly familiar with, but another group of pirates was the Barbary Coast in North Africa. It got so bad that the U.S. Navy was sent to Africa in 1800 to put down these pirates. They had captured many ships, many Americans were holding them for ransom, and it was a first overseas adventure for the U.S. Navy. First in 1800, and then again in 1812, just after the War of 1812, they went over there. So that's another case of dangerous life. I don't know if you guys heard last year, a schooner out of Camden, they had a mast break, came down and killed a lady. Well, that was not unheard of in sailing days. Many a sailor would meet that sort of end. And then once you were hurt, there was very little medical attention. These days, we have satellite communications with Johns Hopkins Medical. They have a doctor on call for us 24 hours a day. We can talk to them. We have telemetry that we can send EKGs to them. First class, not first class, but better medical care than what the old timers would see. My great-great-grandfather, Orlando Sawyer, he had his first command, I said, at 20. He had met his wife on a trip to South Africa with a Captain Yates from Round Pond. That family had invited, I'm not sure if it was Emily Fawcett, I can't remember her first name, but my great-great-grandmother was invited to take a trip with the Yates family, and and Orlando Sawyer was the chief mate at the time. So that's where he met his wife, was on a sailing trip to Africa, South Africa. So that was happenstance. He grew up in Machias, ended up settling in Round Pond after that. Anytime anybody wants to ask questions or follow-ups, please go ahead. That will make this more interesting if we can work back and forth. My career started when I was 10 years old. I can remember going up to Damascotta Lake and buying this old 12-foot wooden skiff that was half rotten. And that was after we had moved down on the harbor, and I had a few lobster traps. I got a lobster license, and my dad and I would row out and haul these lobster traps. After a couple of years, I was going by myself, and then I bought a Rupert Reilly skiff, which was almost famous in the area as being the skiff to have, a 16-foot skiff with a high bow and a flat bottom. Made an excellent skiff for a young guy to haul out of because it was very stable. After that, by the time I was a junior in high school, I actually skipped the last week of my junior year in high school to go out with Lee Reilly to go to George's Banks and go scallop fishing. And that led to a site on the Miss Vicky, which was his other boat that his son was running, purse seining out of Gloucester. So I spent the summer I turned 17 in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And if you've ever seen the Perfect Storm movie, the Hannah Bowden was tied up next to us at one point. I walked across to her deck. The Crow's Nest bar that they show in that movie, the Crow's Nest is across the street, and it's a little dive. But at 17, I was going in there and buying beer. I was the youngest one in the crew, and I had a full beard by the middle of the summer, and I'd walk right in with the rest of the guys and sit down and order a beer, and that's how I started my fishing career. We were purse seining for herring out of Gloucester, Massachusetts. And the next 3 summers after that, I worked on the same boat, but at that point, Bill Dawson had purchased the boat. He was my next door neighbor. Lee was 2 houses down. Bill was only my next door neighbor, and we went ground fishing offshore, off Jeffries, down east, fishing. And that was the only time I ever was seasick in my career. I had a night watch on the wheel. I guzzled down a can of Coke. I went up to the bridge, and this line of thunderstorms came through, and we were banging and thrashing all over the place, and that soda didn't sit well. I went opened up the window and out it went, and that's the only time I ever got seasick out of 40 years of going to sea. Everybody does. At one point, there's got to be something that triggers it for somebody. Once in a while, you can get by, and I mostly did. So that was the beginning of my career going to sea, and it also got me interested in Maine Maritime. I was a B+ student at Lincoln Academy. I thought I would go to college, but I didn't know where or what. And then Bob Pratt, who was my scuba instructor, was doing some part-time work down to Maine Maritime, and why don't you apply down to Maine Maritime? It's like, I don't know anything about that. Looked into it a little bit, and it's like, okay, being on the water, going to college, okay, that will work. So I went to Maine Maritime, 4 years, military academy at the time. Everybody wore uniforms every day. You had morning colors, you had weekly inspections, you had room inspections, you wore uniforms to class. The big thing I said, it was always easy to know what you were going to put on in the morning, because it was either long sleeve shirts or a short sleeve shirt, and other than that, it was khakis, blues in the winter, very much a Navy uniform. Some people in my class did go on to go into the Navy, because things were so slow when we got out of school that there wasn't a lot of job opportunities in the mid-'80s. I graduated in '85. In '86, I did take a job on the ocean research vessel as an AB, an able-bodied seaman, below my license. But it was, oh, if you do this one trip as an AB, then we'll get you in as a third mate. Well, the AB job was so wonderful that I didn't go back as third mate. The AB job was 12 hours a day. You spend 4 hours of bridge watch and 8 hours on deck, chipping and painting, doing other maintenance work on deck, all for $40 a day. That was below minimum wage, but since we were offshore, minimum wage didn't apply. For the third officer, it was $70 a day with no overtime, no weekend overtime. It was just a straight $70 a day. Almost twice as much, but still nothing. So at that point, I came home, went lobster and sternman with a friend of mine, Mike Pryor, for the winter and shrimping. And the next spring, I bought my own lobster boat and went lobstering for the next 4 years. Until the first Gulf War came around. At that point, they wanted anybody with a license, anybody that could just fill the billet. They didn't care who you were, what you were. I had renewed my license in the fall, and by Christmas time in 1990, I got a job on an SL7. It's a 950-foot ship. Specially converted from a container ship to a fast ro-ro/container ship for the Navy. These ships were built prior to the oil embargo in the 70s. They were built 69, 70. They were fast. They were 120,000 horsepower. They would do 38 knots fully loaded, faster than you needed to go water skiing behind. It would send a rooster tail nearly 40 feet in the air behind the ship of the water coming up. It was a very impressive ship. We came through the Straits of Gibraltar and just about blinked and we were by everybody. You never looked more than like 1 point on either side of the bow, because you were past anybody before you ever got a chance for them to be at risk of collision. We had to slow down and go through the Suez Canal, and then we had to stop in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for fuel, because we were burning it so fast that we didn't have enough on board and we had a lot of fuel. So we topped off in Jeddah, arrived in Adaman, Saudi Arabia, the day before the war began, the 1991 Gulf War. And that day we rolled a dozen Patriot batteries off the ship, and they set up one right at the end of the dock, right where we were. That night, the Army people came down and said, we're going to work as long as we can, but the war starts tonight. And so be ready for a gas attack, be ready for us to stop cargo, and we'll go on from there. So at around midnight, all of a sudden the Army said, that's it, we shut the ship down. We all got our gas masks and our suits on. We didn't put the gas masks on right away. A couple hours later, the first Scud missile came overhead, and the Patriot missile, you'd hear a sonic boom, you look, and there would be a streak of light going in the sky, and then boom, Scud missile falls into the harbor. That went on for 4 or 5 hours. At one point, the chief mate on the ship had read, there's a gas detection kit, and there's nerve gas, mustard gas, different types of gases. And he was like, come to the door, but have your gas mask on. It's like, what, Brad? Just come to the door. He's calling over the radio. And I'm on the bridge with the captain and the second mate and myself. And I go to the door, and I've got my gas mask on. Brad goes, there's nerve gas in the house. It's like, holy shit. And he said, let me see and nerve gas is the only one that if it changes color, it's safe. All the rest of them were if it changes color, the gas was present. Nerve gas was if it changes color, changes blue, it's safe. So other than reading the message wrong, that was a little bit of a scare that night. After about 6 in the morning, I was beat. I'd been up since morning the day before, coming into port. I went down, laid down with my gas mask on, slept for a couple hours, got up, opened the door, looked. I don't see anybody. Do I dare take the gas mask off, or do I go find somebody and ask what's going on? I decided I would just take my chances at that point and took the gas mask off. We went through the same thing the next night. We had offloaded all our cargo, but we were anchored out in the harbor trying to get more fuel, and we had hooked up to a small tanker, about a 400-foot tanker, which is actually a pretty good-sized tanker, but that was our fuel barge. And we were pumping fuel, and we were all in gas masks and complete clothing, and none of the crew on this Filipino tanker had anything. Please give us gas masks. We don't have any extra. We have just enough for our crew. After the third or fourth Patriot missile went off and scuds fell down in the harbor, they'd had enough. They unhooked the hose, left it hanging on the side of our ship, and steamed out of the harbor. They were done. They didn't want any more to do with that. So that was my Gulf War experience. I came back to Florida with the ship. They didn't know if they needed to take more military equipment over or they needed to go back and pick stuff up and bring it back home. So we sat in Florida for a couple of weeks. And my son and my daughter and my wife drove to Florida and spent a couple of weeks on the ship with me. And you guys can barely remember that because Sarah was 1 and Ben was 3. So they were a little young. We did go to Disney for a day. Yeah, but they were too young to remember. That's why we're not taking you just yet. You got to remember it. So that was, I got off, went home, got on another fast sea lift ship, the Bellatrix, and before I knew it, I was in Adaman, Saudi Arabia again, and this time was to load cargo to bring it back home. The Algol, the one I was on before, was tied up in front of me, so I went over to see the captain. He had been the second mate, and he was a former Sealand captain, which is a first commercial container ship company. And he goes, oh, good, you're back. It's like, well, I'm on the Bellatrix. No, I'm short 2 officers. I need you. You have 5 officers over there, and I only have 1 over here. It's like, okay, well, clear it with the company, and I'll go back. Because Captain Romer, who was on the Bellatrix, was not a big fan of anybody. He was kind of hard to deal with. And I went back, and I said, well, I just talked to Captain Savage, and he's requested that I move over to the Algol. You can't. I'm going to send the other third mate. All I know is he was calling the company. And a few minutes later, the captain got a call. You're sending Pendleton over to the Algol because they're going to go with three officers, and you're going to have 4, so we're going to pick which one goes. And I was new at that point. I just made one more trip than the other guys had. But that was my first 2 fast ships. The Algol, 20 years later, I was captain of the Algol, only for a short time down in New Orleans when she was tied up in an ROS status. But I did get to be captain of the first ship I was third mate on. So that cycled around. It's not the only time I've cycled ships. After the, I skipped a few things. I was going to tell you about my trips as a cadet for Maine Maritime. My freshman trip was pretty nice, pretty mild. We went to Norfolk, Virginia for firefighting. Then we went to Lisbon, Portugal. It was a great city in the 80s to go to visit. And then Barcelona, Spain, which was real nice place to visit. As freshmen, we thought it was great just to walk around. The seniors were out getting drunk. They thought it was a really great place because you could walk into any cafe and buy whatever you wanted. It didn't matter. And then the next year at Maine Maritime, I was assigned to a U.S. Navy tanker, a U.S. Navy owned but commercially operated tanker. I flew to Hawaii and joined the ship there, except my baggage didn't come with me. So I joined the ship with the clothes on my back, and I got to spend about 20 minutes at Sears getting some shoes and getting some jeans and some underwear and a couple t-shirts. And we went off to the next port, which happened to be the Philippines, when luckily my bag showed up there, which sometimes I've seen it where guys' bags chase them around the world. We keep going, and it was always at the last port or showing up a day after we left. So I was lucky. That's the only time it ever happened to me, and I did pick it up the next day. But we went to Subic, which was notorious for a wild town for the Navy. Then we went up to Yosu, Korea, a tanker town, industrial. Sasebo, Japan, which U.S. Navy has some ships there, and then down to Guam, back up to Sasebo, and back to L.A., and I had my 60 days of cadetship and were done, and I was home by the 3rd of July, which I thought was really pretty good. I timed it well. Most cadets don't get home till late after, and I actually made some money. Usually cadet wages was $15 a day, I think, then, and I came home with $3,000 because they paid me third mate's overtime for work on the Navy refueling system. They wrote it off against the Navy budget and gave me a bunch of money, which was pretty nice, considering cadets usually don't have any money. Our second cruise at Maine Maritime was a little more interesting. We went to Recife, Brazil. We went below the equator, did our equator crossing ceremony, and then back to Recife, which I think a lot of guys proposed, but not many of them brought the girls home with them. It was a beach town, and it was a lot of fun was had. They had this alcohol. It's like a rum called cachaça, and it was very strong. And Coca-Cola was very expensive, so you got a splash of Coke and a lot of rum when you ordered a drink. So that was Recife. And from there we went to Tenerife in the Canary Islands, which is also a great place. Spent 5 days there. Came back to the ship in a police car on my last night. I had a lot of money, local cruzeros, and beer was only like 10 cruzeros per beer, and it got bad. I did break a street light and shot putted a great big rock. And it was like, okay, I can hit that. Yeah, I did. Better if I'd missed, but I got to ride back and got in a little bit of trouble at Maine Maritime, but not a lot. I was the cadet bosun, so they took pity on me. So I was pretty integral to operations. So the bosun stood up for me, the chief mate stood up for me, and I got away with murder on that one.
Ask a question?
Yeah.
When the cadets go out, do you go out with Navy product to deliver to ports, or do they just have you do the ship?
Learning the ship mostly. We did carry some some medical stuff to Brazil. It was all donated items. The Maine Maritime's getting a new training ship next year. And this ship is designed as a training ship and as a emergency relief ship for hurricane relief or natural disaster relief. It is made to house rescue workers. It has a ro-ro ramp so they can drive stuff on. It has a big crane. They can lift stuff on the ship, and they can actually support any Hurricane Sandy, Katrina, or a tsunami situation, what happened in Haiti where the Navy went down there. And there's 5 of these ships being built, so there'll be 5 ships that can go to a disaster. They're building them in the Philadelphia shipyard. Used to be a Navy shipyard, but now it's a commercial shipyard.
I have to know, Nana, did you know about this until now? Did you know about it?
You didn't know about the cop car. I never told anybody about the cop car. No. Yeah. No, that was bad. After the first Gulf War, I got a tanker job that following summer on my Dynachem, a chemical tanker that would run from Houston and the Gulf Coast to the West Coast. We carried lots of nasty stuff. Basically, things like dry cleaning fluid, caustic soda, different acids, all kinds of nasty products to the West Coast, and then we'd pick up either a load of gasoline or lube oil or a mixed load and bring it back to the Gulf Coast. Or we did bring a full load of gasoline one time from San Francisco all the way to Philadelphia to Marcus Hook. And Wendy and the kids came down again, only that was only a year later in the same year. Poor Emmett's already asleep. I'm that bad, Emmett? I'm sorry. After the Dynachem, I had another tanker job on the Omai Wabash. That was a U.S. coastal ship. Got on in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They said, we're back here every month. I go, great. On there for 4.5 months, never came back to New Hampshire. 2 weeks after I got off, I got a call from the captain. Oh, we're coming to New Hampshire. I need you to come down and night mate, which is take the place of the chief mate so he could get a day off. He hadn't had a day off since I had left. And so I went down and night mated the ship. So it did come back, but just not while I was assigned to it. After that, I joined the Crowley Ambassador. It was a small ro-ro that ran from Port Everglades down to Puerto Limon, Costa Rica, and Manzanillo, Panama. It was a 2-week run. It wasn't a great paying job. It was another $70 a day and $12 an hour overtime job. But I did make some overtime for cargo operations and a few other things. The most memorable thing about that ship was we were med-moored in Panama. It was a ro-ro with a stern ramp. So you'd go into port, drop 2 anchors spread out, and then back to the dock as hard as you can, keeping those anchors tight, put out some lines, tie off the ship, you stop the engines and put the ramp down. Well, at 3 o'clock in the morning, we got ready to leave, and I went up on the bow to heave the anchors. And I went and looked over the side to see where the anchors were leading, and behind me I hear, snake! The AB is coming unglued. Well, on top, he had gone to loosen up the anchor brake, and on top of the anchor chain, right about eye level, was a python. It had swam out, swam up It was only about 4 feet long. He wasn't a big one, but he was, if you didn't like snakes, it was not something you wanted to see at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then the chase was on. We were trying to get this thing over the side. We had shovels and we were trying to scoop it up, and he kept going. Finally, the captain sent down, it's like a cattle prod. Well, the reason we had this cattle prod on board was we was notorious for stowaways or smugglers stowing away on the ship from Panama to Fort Lauderdale, and sometimes you'd have to chase them down. And this was like a taser. And it worked on the snake. As long as you held the button down, the snake would coil up into a big ball, but the minute you let go of the button, he'd go again. There was no delayed reaction. So after 2 or 3 tries, we did get the snake zapped and over the side. And the AB that started screaming didn't want anything to do with it. I had to get one of the other guys to come up and give me a hand. But we did get rid of the snake, and the pilot says, oh, that one's fine. They're not poisonous. It's the orange ones you want to watch out for. It's like, oh, great, nice to know. Never saw an orange one, don't want to see an orange one. So that was the Ambassador. After that ship, I went to work on another military contract ship, a tanker. I flew to Singapore. I thought, hey, great, I'm going to be traveling around the Far East. Things are going to be interesting. Got on the ship and it went to Diego Garcia, which is an atoll in the southern hemisphere in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and it's the middle of nowhere. There is a Navy base there. There is a little PX, Seamen's Club, an Air Force base, but that's only manned when they have deployments of B-52s. So it's the middle of nowhere, and I was going to be there the first hitch for 4 months. And luckily my mother would take, since I was in a known spot, I could actually get mail. And my mother would take 2 or 3 weeks of Lincoln County News, wrap them up, send them to me. So I was reading Lincoln County News, and that was my connection with the world. We could get Stars and Stripes and a few magazines in port, but for the most part, we were at anchor, and we rarely would go ashore. Once in a while, they had a launch service that would let you go ashore. We had one rescue mission while we were there. They had some boats, like little Boston whalers, that guys could rent and go fishing in the lagoon. 2 of the Navy guys thought it would be fun to go outside the lagoon, and then the motor stalled and they were blown miles and miles and miles away. It was a weatherman and a messman were the 2 Navy guys. Not a lot of nautical experience between the 2 of them. The only reason they were found was because they had P-3s stationed there, like the P-3s that used to fly out of Brunswick, and they had FLIR infrared cameras, and they had actually poured a little bit of gasoline into a plastic bag and lit it and threw it in the air when they heard the plane going over, and that bright flash of that was the only thing that they spotted them. They'd been looking for them for 4 days. They were in pretty hard shape when we, and lucky us, as a tanker, we were lower to the water and easier to make a rescue from. So they sent us on the Lawrence Gianella out to get these 2 guys, and we went down in our lifeboat, went over and towed their boat alongside, hoisted it up on deck, put our lifeboat back. I went up on the catwalk where the boat was. 2 pulls, the engine started. It was nothing wrong with it at all. They just couldn't get it started, and they drifted 48 miles out to sea. They went quite a ways. So that was an interesting night. And then the company says, well, we're not paying you guys for that. That was a life-saving thing, so there's no overtime for that night that you guys all worked. Oh, thanks a lot. The Navy gave the company an award for their vessel doing the life-saving, but the crew got nothing. We did get the name of our ship mentioned on the local news, the Armed Forces news on the island. They were interviewing the 2 guys, and they said, those cooks on the Gianella, they really fed us good when we got on board. It's like, well, it's Gianella, not Gianella, but okay, and they did. They took care of them. I think anything would have tasted good to them after 4 days in the bright sunshine. So that was that ship. I went through a list of all my ships, and almost everything had something exciting to tell about. I was surprised. Most of these first ships, I was only on for 4 months or 8 months, or it would vary, and then I'd go on to another job. Starting in 1995, I was assigned to the Alex Bonnyman, which was really funny because on the way out to the Gianella flying to Singapore, I look down when we take off from Portland, and there's a ship at anchor off Portland. It's like, why couldn't I get a job on that ship? Be careful what you wish for, because the next year I got a job on that ship, and it was in Diego Garcia. So I went all the way back to Diego again. It was a good ship. I liked the captain, the crew were pretty good. Chief mate was a little strange, but all in all, it was a good ship. We went to the Persian Gulf for a readiness thing back in the 1996, 95, 96. Saddam Hussein's sons were in a whole bunch of trouble. They left the country, they came back. They thought it was going to start a civil war. They deployed all our ships from Diego Garcia to standby up off Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. So we get together and we get to practice our convoy operations, which we had done a few times before. And we convoyed up to Bahrain. We're going through the Straits of Hormuz, and one of the ship's engines breaks down. We're all in a line. There's a commercial ship, a Navy ship, a commercial ship, a Navy ship, a commercial ship, a Navy ship, a destroyer or whatever. They were taking it pretty serious. And we all started to go to the right to avoid the ship that was broken down. Well, the captain heard the order to all go to the right, and he went to the right. It's like, no, not you. You just go wherever you can go, but don't go into the other ships. The Navy ship that was between me and the other ship got within like 150 yards of running right into the stern. They didn't notice they were getting closer and closer and closer and closer. We were calling the destroyer first by their position number, then by their hull number, then by their name, which we weren't supposed to in convoy, but they wouldn't listen. And then they finally figured out they were in trouble. They yanked off, and then we followed them. Everybody went around. But that was a case of, yeah, that was a little too close for comfort. Right in the Straits of Hormuz, of all places. There were other things on the Bonnyman besides, but that was, somebody's got the phone going. Is that you, Nate? No? Okay. My last ship that I went to, Diego Garcia, was my first second mate's job. I had been third mate through all these other ships. First second mate's job was on the Calvin P. Titus. It was a Merce ship that had been converted for the military contract use. It had a ro-ro deck on the stern, and then 2 cranes forward so they could self-unload. I was second mate, 4 months there. Got to know the steward real well. We played cribbage together almost every night. And then I left and never thought I'd see him again. We'll come to find out, for the last 15 or so years of my career, he was the steward on my ship, and we played cribbage every night. It was good to have a friend like that. It's hard when you're captain, it's hard to associate with the crew or familiarize yourself. As a steward, he was senior for the crew members, and it was easy enough for us to get along. So the Alex Bonnyman, the Calvin P. Titus later became the Maersk Arizona, which I'll get to in a minute. My next job, which messed up a trip to Florida for myself and my family. Sarah probably does remember this one. We had tickets all booked. We were going to go to Florida, Disney, vacation with some friends, and I got a new job. and I wanted the job really bad because it meant that I'd never have to go back to Diego Garcia. And so I took a job on the Maersk Texas, a new Maersk self-unloading container ship that was running at the time from Europe, the Mediterranean to the US Gulf Coast and back to the Mediterranean again. Really nice run. Within a couple months, we changed to a South American run where we went from Charleston, Miami, Freeport, Bahamas, Kingston, Jamaica, Puerto Limon, Costa Rica, through the Panama Canal, down to Colombia, a couple ports in Ecuador, a couple ports in Peru, a couple ports in Chile, and then hit them all again on the way back. And I'd be on that run for the next 4 years, only instead of on the Maersk Texas, I was on the Maersk Tennessee, a sister ship, because I had to go back. I went back to work early once again, unscheduled. They needed somebody right away, and I said yes. Well, by saying yes over the years, I advanced rather quickly. By 2000, I was then the chief mate on the Maersk Tennessee, still on that South American run, and then shortly after that, we traded those ships in for a much larger ship, a 950-foot container ship that was running from the U.S. East Coast and Gulf to the Persian Gulf, Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka. And that was the Maersk Carolina. I was chief officer on that. It was a good ship. It was only 25-knot ship instead of a 35-knot ship, but that's still pretty fast for a 950-foot ship. You could still water ski behind it if you wanted. One of my memories on that ship, well, it was the sister ship, got caught in a storm up off Newfoundland. The chief officer and the bosun and a couple of the men went out on board, out on deck to do some repairs from storm damage, and a rogue wave came over the bow and did a number on them. The chief mate poked a hole through his arm. He had a broken leg. He had a broken wrist. He was cut up pretty bad. One of the other guys broke his back. It was the only one that survived it without getting hurt was the cadet, and he ran back and told them that there was people hurt on the bow, and that's when all hell breaks loose. I joined the ship in Halifax with about 2 hours notice. I got a phone call, can you be at the airport in an hour and a half? Yeah, just barely. I can throw some stuff together and be there. I flew to Halifax, and as I'm going in a cab through the gate, the ambulances are coming out of the gate. The ship had just docked. They were just getting the guys off. Spent some time on there, brought the ship down the coast, trained another chief mate, and then went back to the Maersk Carolina as my ship for a couple more years, except my ship got into a storm and lost 140 containers, not when I was on board, but just before I was supposed to come back. And they did some real damage to the ship. We had to do a repair period in Gibraltar and get the bow straightened out. Never did get it completely straightened out. There was a big divot in the deck where everything had got pushed together. So the Maersk Carolina was my home for a couple of years. And then I got my first captain's job in 2004. I got my license in February, and in July I had a captain's job. The former Calvin P. Titus was now the Maersk Arizona, and I flew to Salalah, Oman to join the ship, and we were working in the Persian Gulf, India, Pakistan, and back and forth. I was on that ship for 4 or 5 years. One of the most memorable trips on that was we would call on a port called Zubair, Iraq. This was 2003, 2004, just after the second Iraqi war. And the British had a outpost at the port, and we'd take supplies up the river, 68 miles up the river, and unload them. Got to have a beer in Iraq with the British Marines. They had Foster's beer and a big cookout for us because they just wanted to see other people. They treated us well. The next morning we got ready to sail, and we had a pilot come on board, and we had this old decrepit tugboat come alongside. It's like, well, are they going to put up a line? They have no lines. Well, we'll give them a line. They can't back against the line. They're only a single screw tug. Okay, so in other words, I've got to get the ship off the dock, turned around in a 4-knot current and back out. Yeah, okay. All right, so I used all my seamanship skills to get the ship off the dock without crushing anything. Get up to the turning basin, and the pilot goes, oh yeah, by the way, there's a sunken ship halfway up the turning basin. See the mast over there by the shore? Well, that ship goes across the turning basin. It's like, okay. So I've got half as much room as I thought I did. We start turning, backing and filling, bow thruster turning, and we get about 90 degrees to the current, and we're about 10 meters off a ship on the dock and about 5 meters off a ship that's anchored. And we're going sideways with the current, and we've used up all our available starting air for the engine. We went to give it an astern bell, nothing happened. It was like, oh, great. The third mate's panicking, what do we do? I said, we're gonna wait a couple minutes and try again. And we drifted down by. We got past everything, never touched a thing. It was down to 2 meters on the bow and 3 meters on the stern when we finally cleared around. And we get going down the river. We have 68 miles of pilotage. And it's a little more different than going up the Houston Channel or one of the rivers in the US because there are no navigation buoys. There are no markers. There are ships sunk here and sunk there that you have to go around. Luckily, our GPS at the time had a tracker on it, so I could see how we came in. But I'm thinking, okay, I'm watching the pilot, and then the pilot says, I get off here. It's like, we've only gone 12 miles. It's 68 miles out, and it's getting dark. And he's, oh, we don't have fuel for our pilot boat. Their pilot boat was a 16-foot skiff with someone had spray-painted pilot on the side. Real good confidence. Yeah, and that's when the pilot says, you did a good job turning the ship around. Do you have a gift for me? And it's like, I'll give you a gift. But it was typical to give a couple cartons of cigarettes as a gift to the pilots. And they went down the gangway, and I'm like, oh, around the next corner, is there going to be an RPG attack, or what are we in for? But we sailed all the way out. Never saw anything bad other than the sunken ships in the river that we managed to get around. I went home the next week, and my relief had the same trip up there a couple weeks later, and he got halfway out and got stuck on a sandbar. So he didn't have quite such a lucky trip as I did. And he had the pilot still on board. So, oh, I forgot, I was going to tell you guys about the pirates in South America. When I was on the Merce, Tennessee, we'd go to Guayaquil, Ecuador, and I hope I'm not keeping anybody too late. I'm almost done. I've only got another ship to go and I'll be done. In South America, the pirates were looking for cargo to steal. They weren't looking to capture the crew and ransom like the Somali pirates or wanted the ship. They were just looking for cargo. So one night, we'd had a couple run-ins where we'd seen them, scared them off with fire hoses and lights and stuff. But one night they got on board, and partially our pilot there, Captain Garcia, was always very attentive because you'd have to wake him up at each turn in the river. Captain Garcia, we have another turn. Oh yeah, right turn. No, this is a left turn. Oh, left turn. And but that night, the pirates got on board, and we retreated to the house and locked the house down, which was our procedure. And they started trying to break into containers, and they picked about 10 empty containers before they found a full one. And then when they did find a full one, it was full of furniture, overstuffed couches and chairs. And they dragged a couch out and they were dragging it down the catwalk, but it just happened to be the row that our crane sat right across. It was gantry crane, and you couldn't get it around the end of the... So they had to abandon the couch, and they started breaking into more. They finally found a container that had Gillette Trax 3 razor blades in it, and they filled up their boat with case on case on case of Trax 3 razor blades. So there must have been a sale for razor blades after that. A couple months later, we heard that the Navy had mysteriously found a whole bunch of dead pirates in a boat, that they had been shot. The Navy didn't do it, they'd been shot. That was good. We didn't have any problems for about 6 months, and then other desperate people decided that maybe they needed to get in the pirate business, and it was back to run and hide from the pirates. Garcia started bringing a pistol on board because we had no weapons on board at all. And he took a shot at him one night, went out on the bridge wing with his .38 snub-nosed pistol, and he's shooting 400 yards away. He's not going to hit anything, but he scared him away that night, which is good. I don't know if he scared him away or the parachute flare that I shot at him was what scared him away. It was a little brighter than his gun. Also, on the Merce Carolina and then on the Virginia, we had to deal with Somali pirates. They made, you would hear ships being attacked 5 miles ahead of you, 6 miles behind you, and help, and sometimes there was Navy around, sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes the pirates would get the ship, sometimes the crew would fight them off. But they were looking to take the crew. Well, if you've seen the Captain Phillips movie, they were looking to take the ship for a ransom and ransom the crew and the ship off. More the ship than the crew, but the company will pay for the crew eventually. The ship's a priority usually. And so we had no protection at all other than fire hoses and lights and stuff like that. So it got a little nerve-wracking. I was spending almost every night while we were in the pirate waters on the bridge, tracking where the reports of different pirates were going on. And then in 2012, we finally got a security team, 4 former Navy SEALs. They were part of Trident Security. They came with weapons, and I could sleep at night again. So the pirates were now one warning shot, and they'd disappear. The couple times they made runs at us, one time a Navy helicopter got between the ship and the boat. The boat kept coming. The Navy ship laid machine gun fire down across in front of the boat, and they turned around, decided they'd go somewhere else. It was a little easier target than that one. But it was trying times. Now, the latest thing is the Red Sea is basically closed to commercial traffic because of the Houthis. I was about 4 hours from transiting the Red Sea in January of 2024, and the Navy called me up and said, we advised you to turn around. So we turned around, waited a couple days, made an approach again. We're going to have a Navy ship escort you, and then another ship gets attacked. No, go back out. We finally went around Africa. Of course, at that point, we were running out of fuel. Had to stop in Namibia and get fuel and food to get to Spain, and then fuel and food again to get back to the States. So that was the last. They're more political pirates because of what was going on in Israel. They were trying to close down the Red Sea to anybody that aided Israel. So we were careful not to antagonize. And to this day, they're still going around Africa. There's been talk. Few ships have gone through. Few ships have been sunk. They have remote control boats with explosives on board. They have drones with explosives. and it's not a good scene to be going through there. The slower, older ships, the bulkers are still going through that way because they're so slow and take so long to go around the Cape, and it's so dangerous for them to go around the Cape that they still take their chances. So those are the ships they've been sinking. And then May 1st of last year, I retired. I said, enough of this, I'm staying home. 30 years, 34 years was enough. So I called it quits. I still get phone calls from the ship asking advice every once in a while, but they're getting fewer and farther between, which is all right by me. Anybody got any questions? You guys have been all so quiet. Heidi?
I was just wondering if you had like a roster that you looked at of the ships and how you knew to apply for.
Oh, it was through a union, American Maritime Officers. You would call and they would offer a ship up and you would say yes or no. Or they'd say, you're too far down the list, we're not even offering you anything yet. I called for months and I missed the job one time because I was bringing Sarah to daycare. Not daycare, but the preschool here in the old building. And when I got back, I got a message on my phone, we have a job for you on a second mate's job on the Mercer Constellation. And I called right back, couldn't get through, called back. Every 5 minutes I called back. I finally got through, no, we gave that job to somebody else. And I'd been out of work 4 or 5 months at that point and was kind of getting desperate to go to sea. They go, well, every time it was like, you're not high enough on the list. And then certain jobs you would be high enough because nobody else wanted them. And then I got the job on the GNLer and flew to Singapore, and that was pretty steady work after that. The early 90s, like through 94, 5, it was kind of slow. Then I went to work for Mercer the first time, and I basically worked for Mercer for the next 29 years. And then I could call the company and go get a job. Or they'd call me and say, hey, we want you on such and such a ship. Or one time they said, hey, we need you in the office. And I was like, I'm not an office guy. Well, we need somebody with tanker experience and grain experience to manage our specialty ship that's going to Africa. I'm like, yeah, that's not me. Yeah, we need you. I said, but I've got a captain's job here, and it's going to last for 2 months. Well, we can find another captain, but we can't find anybody to run the specialty ships. So I spent months in Norfolk, Virginia. They treated me good. I was down there. I was supposed to be for a month, and it dragged into 3.5 months before they could find somebody to take the job permanently. And then I just needed to get a job to keep my benefits going with the union, so they put me on a ship for 30 days, which was enough to restart my benefits for another 6 months. And then I kind of got back into the rotation and went from there.
We have more questions?
As you progressed in rank, did your condition or privileges on ship change very much?
Well, not so much with rank. Everybody has when you're captain, you have a bigger stateroom, an office, and your day room. Captain and chief engineers. Other than that, all the officers have a decent equivalent room with a desk. The crew, on the last few ships I was on, the crew had their own individual rooms. Going back to when I first started, crew would often share a room. There'd be 2 or maybe 4 bunks in a room, and you shared a head in the hall, the shower in the hall, with 8 other people. The conditions got better over my 34 years. Some of the ships were old. The first couple of ships I was on were built in the 60s, and then it got so that the last couple of ships I was on, the last one was 2006, it was built. I got on it in 13 and retired in 24. So they were newer, nicer ships. The laws have changed. We no longer can lash people. I can withhold wages. I can do a lot of things, but that was another story I was going to tell. I subbed on a sister ship to my first captain's job, and I'd been 145 days. I was supposed to come home, go to my 25th reunion at Maine Maritime, all signed up, and I got a phone call. Yeah, we need you to do this. No, I'm going home. Find somebody else on the ship 2 or 3 times. And it's no. Got to the hotel, and I was going to the airport the next day, and I got a phone call. We've canceled your flight. You're going to the other ship. Never agreed to it, but I went to the other ship. Probably not in the best of mood. Sailed at 2 o'clock in the morning. The next day at noontime, the second mate calls me up and says she can't do anything with the AB. He won't listen to her, won't do anything. I'm like, I don't know, I'll come up. Okay, I'll be up there in just a minute. I came up, talking to the guy. Couldn't smell anything, but he was acting a little strange. I said, well, you had anything to drink? No, because American ships, there's no alcohol allowed. There's zero tolerance for alcohol. And he said, no, I haven't had any drink. I didn't know the guy. I'd been on the ship 12 hours at that point. I didn't know all the crew. I just like, well, we'll go down to my room. I've got a breathalyzer. You blow 0, you can come right back to the bridge. No problem. Okay, we start down the stairs to my room. He bolts. He's running for his room. I'm on the radio calling the chief mate and the bosun, meet me at so-and-so's room. We got to the room. He slams the door in my face. I said, I've got a master key. I'm coming in. No, you're not. I'm going to hold you out. Little spindly guy. At the time, I'm afraid I was about 30 pounds heavier. Turned the master key, and in we went. He went tumbling across the room. The bosun and the chief mate come in behind me. You going to take a breathalyzer? No, you're fired. You refuse a breathalyzer, you're fired, especially after this. So we start searching the room. The chief mate goes into the refrigerator, opens up a water bottle. It's vodka. And that was the end of that guy. So that was the first 12 hours on that ship. Then we went to Pakistan, and it only got worse from there.